What if I told you that in Australia, a serious illness won't bankrupt your family, university debt won't follow you for decades, and taking a year off work to raise your newborn is just normal? Not aspirational, not something you negotiate, just standard policy that applies to everyone. I'm breaking down 10 social policies that Australia considers basic rights, but that spark intense debate in America. By the end of this video, you'll understand the real-world impacts, the costs, and why these differences matter more than you might think. If you're curious about how different societies solve the same problems, hit subscribe. We're diving deep into global policy comparisons, and you won't want to miss future breakdowns like this. Let's start with the most contentious one. In 2022, Miguel, a 34-year-old construction worker in Sydney, noticed persistent fatigue and swollen lymph nodes. Diagnosis: non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Over the next 8 months, he underwent chemotherapy, radiation, and multiple hospital stays. His treatment was managed by oncology specialists at a major public hospital. Here's the striking part. His total out-of-pocket cost was about $400. That covered parking fees during dozens of hospital visits and some supplementary medications not fully covered by the system. The chemotherapy, radiation, consultations, scans, hospital beds, surgery, all covered under Medicare, Australia's universal healthcare system. You might be wondering, how does this actually work? Every Australian taxpayer pays a Medicare levy, 2% of their taxable income. That's it. Someone earning $60,000 pays $1,200 annually. In return, they get access to all public hospital services, subsidized doctor visits, and essential medical procedures without considering their employment status, pre-existing conditions, or ability to afford private insurance. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare's 2023 report, Australia spends 10.7% of its GDP on healthcare compared to America's 17.8%. Despite spending significantly less, Australians have a higher life expectancy, 83.2 years versus 76.4 years in the United States. The system isn't perfect, wait times for elective procedures can stretch months, and many Australians still purchase private insurance for faster access. But the fundamental premise is different. Healthcare access doesn't depend on your employer or your savings account. The key takeaway here: universal healthcare doesn't mean free healthcare. It's collectively funded, and everyone contributes based on their income. But it removes the direct connection between employment and survival during medical crises. Healthcare is just the beginning. Let's look at what happens when Australians need to step away from work entirely. Priya and James, a couple in Melbourne, welcomed their first child in 2023. Priya, working as a marketing coordinator, received 20 weeks of government-funded parental leave pay at the national minimum wage, $8.12 per week. Her employer then added 14 additional weeks at her full salary as part of their company policy. James, an accountant, took 2 weeks of dad and partner pay, also government-funded. This isn't exceptional. The Australian government's Department of Social Services reported in 2024 that over 180,000 families access parental leave pay annually. Compare this to the United States, which remains one of only 6 countries worldwide without any form of national paid parental leave policy. Here's what most people don't realize. The Australian payment isn't generous by European standards. 20 weeks at minimum wage means Priya received about $16,240 before tax. Enough to cover basics, but requiring financial planning. The policy aims to support crucial infant bonding periods and maternal recovery while maintaining workforce attachment. It's a baseline, not luxury. The government funds this through general taxation, viewing early childhood development as a public investment. Studies from the Melbourne Institute's 2023 research indicate paid parental leave correlates with better infant health outcomes, higher breastfeeding rates, and improved maternal mental health. Employers handle the administration but are reimbursed by government. It doesn't come from their budgets. The practical takeaway: the policy recognizes that reproduction shouldn't force families into poverty or women out of careers permanently. It's not perfect, single parents and low-income families still struggle, but it establishes that new parents deserve support during a vulnerable transition. Now, what happens when those children grow up and want to pursue higher education? This is where the systems diverge dramatically. On enrolled in engineering at the University of Queensland in 2018. Over 4 years, her tuition totaled $48,000. Not cheap. But here's the mechanism that changes everything. The Higher Education Contribution Scheme, known as HECS Help, didn't pay tuition up front. The Australian government covered the full amount, creating a debt in her name. She graduated in 2022 and started working as a junior engineer earning $55,000 annually. That year, she paid exactly $0 toward her student debt. Why? Because HECS repayments only begin when your income exceeds a threshold, $51, $550 in 2022. By 2024, was earning $72,000. At that income level, her mandatory repayment rate was 1% of her total income, $720 for the entire year. Not per month. For the year. The debt is indexed to inflation, not commercial interest rates, so it grows much more slowly than private loans. If never earns above the threshold, she never repays. If she dies with remaining debt, it's written off, no inheritance claims, no family liability. Universities Australia's 2023 data shows 1.8 million Australians currently hold HECS debts totaling $74 billion. The government effectively operates as the lender, but repayment is automatically deducted through the tax system based on capacity to pay. Let's break this down. Education is treated as a public investment that generates private benefit. You pay back when, and only when, you're actually earning enough to afford it. There's no monthly payment stress, no default risk affecting your credit score, no aggressive collection practices. The approach has critics. Some argue it enables universities to raise fees knowing students won't feel immediate pain. Others contend that taxpayers subsidize degrees that don't lead to employment. But the structural principle remains. Education debt is tied to income capacity, not rigid payment schedules. Education access matters, but so does simply surviving between jobs. Here's where Australia's safety net gets really comprehensive. Marcus, a 42-year-old hospitality manager in Brisbane, lost his job during COVID-related closures in 2021. Within 3 weeks of applying, he began receiving JobSeeker payment, $693 per fortnight for a single person without children, plus rent assistance of $310 per fortnight. That's roughly $2,012 monthly. Here's the crucial structural difference. For the first month, Marcus faced no immediate work requirements, no mandatory job applications, no compliance appointments, no work for the dole obligations. The system provided a grace period for him to stabilize, deal with the crisis of job loss, and begin strategic job searching rather than panic applying everywhere. The Australian Council of Social Services 2023 research indicates approximately 740,000 Australians receive JobSeeker at any given time. The payment rate is genuinely controversial. Many researchers argue it falls below the poverty line, but the structure prioritizes immediate survival over immediate compliance. After the initial period, mutual obligation requirements do activate. Marcus had to document his job searches, attend job service provider meetings, and demonstrate ongoing effort to secure employment. The system isn't unconditional forever, but the philosophy differs from some American approaches. Stabilize first, then engage with employment assistance. You might be wondering about the costs and fraud risks. Services Australia, the administering agency, reported a fraud rate of 0.3% in 2023, fairly low, though critics argue the rate would be higher if investigated more thoroughly. The program costs approximately $16 billion annually, funded through general taxation. The key insight: the policy treats unemployment as a temporary state requiring immediate survival support, followed by structured transition back to work. It acknowledges that panic and homelessness don't facilitate good job searching. Beyond unemployment, Australia has built protections for workers while they're actually employed. Let's explore those. Lisa worked in retail in Perth for 25 years. She never set up a retirement account, never spoke with a financial advisor, never even thought seriously about retirement planning. But when she turned 55, she discovered she had $340,000 in retirement savings. How? Australia's superannuation guarantee system. Since 1992, every employer has been legally required to contribute a percentage of employee earnings into a retirement fund, currently 11.5%, rising to 12% by 2025. This isn't optional. It's not dependent on employee choice or enrollment. It happens automatically for every worker earning more than $450 per month. For Lisa, earning roughly $55,000 annually for most of her career, her employers were depositing about $6,000 per year into her superannuation account without her active involvement. Over 25 years, with compound investment returns, this built substantial retirement wealth. The Australian Taxation Office's 2023 data reveals Australia's superannuation system now holds $3.5 trillion in assets, making it the fourth largest pension system globally. Unlike American 401k plans where employer matching is optional and generous, superannuation contributions are mandatory and universal. Here's what this means practically. Even low-income workers accumulate retirement savings. The system forces wealth building rather than relying on individual financial literacy or discipline. A retail worker, a cleaner, a hospitality worker, all build retirement funds automatically. The system has legitimate criticisms. Fund management fees can be high, eroding returns. Early access is heavily restricted. You generally can't touch the money until preservation age, currently 60. And the tax concessions disproportionately benefit high-income earners. But the foundational principle, mandatory employer contributions creating universal retirement savings, fundamentally changes retirement security. The takeaway: Australia decided that retirement shouldn't depend on individual financial savvy. By making contributions mandatory and automatic, the system creates baseline security even for workers who never think about it. Retirement matters, but so does surviving the years before retirement when you're too sick to work. Tan, a 38-year-old former electrician in Adelaide, developed severe chronic regional pain syndrome after a workplace injury in 2020. The condition left him unable to work more than a few hours at a time. After 18 months of medical assessments, specialist reports, and government evaluations, he qualified for the disability support pension. His payment, $1,002 per fortnight, plus pharmaceutical allowance and rent assistance, approximately $2,600 monthly. The payment continues indefinitely as long as his condition persists, with periodic medical reviews every few years to reassess capacity. Services Australia's 2024 data shows approximately 750,000 Australians receive the disability support pension. Qualification is rigorous. You must prove your condition prevents you from working 15 or more hours per week, and it must be permanent or expected to last at least 2 years. But once granted, it provides long-term income security without constant recertification battles every few months. Compare this to systems where disability benefits require frequent renewals, creating ongoing anxiety and administrative burden for people managing chronic conditions. Australia's approach treats disability as a sustained support need, not a temporary crisis to overcome quickly. The system acknowledges a fundamental reality. Not everyone can work full-time, and those unable to work shouldn't be left in destitution. It's expensive. The program costs roughly $19 billion annually, but it's structured around the principle that severe disability warrants ongoing support without perpetual bureaucratic hurdles. These financial supports are significant, but Australia has also invested in making basic services affordable. Let's look at childcare. Rebecca and Tom live in Sydney with their 2 young children. Combined, they earn $150,000 annually. Both children attend daycare 5 days per week. The full cost, $580 per week for both children, about $30,000 annually. But here's where the child care subsidy system activates. At their income level, the government subsidizes 50% of childcare costs, reducing their actual payment to $290 per week. Still substantial but manageable. Families earning $75,000 or less receive up to 90% subsidy. Lower-income families might pay only $30 to $40 per week for full-time childcare. The Australian Bureau of Statistics 2023 analysis shows the child care subsidy supports approximately 1.3 million children. The subsidy is means tested using a sliding scale, Higher earners receive less support, lower earners receive more. The program costs the government about $12 billion annually. The policy isn't comprehensive. Even with subsidies, childcare consumes 15 to 20% of many family budgets. And the sector faces workforce shortages, quality concerns, and accessibility issues in rural areas. But the structural support exists, making childcare more affordable than it would be in a purely market-based system. The underlying principle: childcare costs shouldn't be a barrier to workforce participation, particularly for mothers. By subsidizing care based on income, the system aims to support both child development and parental employment. It's imperfect but intentional. Australia doesn't just support children's early years. The country has also made basic medications remarkably affordable. George, 67, lives in Brisbane and manages type 2 diabetes along with high blood pressure and cholesterol. He requires multiple daily medications. In Australia, his maximum cost per prescription, $31.60 for general patients, or $7.70 if he holds a concession card, available to seniors, disability pensioners, and low-income earners. His total monthly medication cost, about $46.20. Those same medications in the United States without insurance coverage, estimated $600 to $800 monthly. This dramatic difference stems from the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, or PBS. The Australian Department of Health's 2023 data shows the PBS subsidizes over 900 medications, costing the government $15.4 billion annually. The system works through government negotiation. The PBS uses national purchasing power to negotiate drug prices down, then subsidizes the difference between negotiated cost and consumer copayment. There's an additional protection called the safety net. Once Australians spend $277.20 on PBS medicines in a calendar year, all their prescriptions become free for the remainder of that year. For concession card holders, the threshold is just $92.40. This ensures chronic condition patients aren't bankrupted by medication needs. The key mechanism: the government acts as a single purchaser with enormous bargaining power, negotiating prices that pharmaceutical companies must accept to access the Australian market. Patients pay capped co-payments. The government absorbs the rest. Critics argue this system can delay access to newer medications while negotiations occur, and pharmaceutical companies sometimes claim it stifles innovation. Supporters point to how it makes life-sustaining medications accessible to virtually everyone regardless of income. Medication access is crucial, but so is the ability to take time off when you're actually sick. Here's where Australia's workplace protections stand out. Daniel teaches high school in Melbourne. As a full-time employee, Australian law guarantees him minimum entitlements: 4 weeks, that's 20 days, of paid annual leave every year. This leave accumulates continuously. His employer cannot refuse it indefinitely. They can only defer it briefly for operational reasons. Beyond annual leave, Daniel gets 10 days of paid personal and sick leave annually. Unlike systems where sick days expire each year, and used sick leave rolls over indefinitely. By his 5th year of teaching, Daniel had accumulated 35 and used sick days, insurance against serious illness or family emergencies. After 7 years with the same employer, he'll qualify for long service leave, an additional 8 to 13 weeks of paid leave, depending on state regulations. Fair Work Ombudsman's 2024 data confirms these are legally mandated minimums for all full-time employees across industries. Part-time workers receive pro rata equivalents. Approximately 9.1 million Australians work under the Fair Work system's protection. Here's what matters practically. Leave is treated as a workplace right, not an optional perk. Employers who discourage leave use or create cultures where taking leave is stigmatized can face legal consequences. The cultural expectation is that you will take leave, and annual leave accumulation beyond certain thresholds requires employer action to reduce. To understand why this differs from some American approaches, many U.S. workers receive leave as a benefit negotiated individually or provided voluntarily by employers. Australian workers receive it as a legal minimum that cannot be negotiated away. It's baked into the employment contract by law. The underlying philosophy: workers need rest, recovery, and work-life balance not as a luxury, but as a fundamental component of sustainable employment. These protections extend beyond just leave days. Australia has also structured its wage system very differently. Isabella, 19 years old, works part-time as a barista in Canberra while studying at university. She works 20 hours per week. Australia's national minimum wage, as of July 2024, $23.23 per hour. But Isabella often works weekends, which carry penalty rates, time and a half on Saturdays, double time on Sundays. When Isabella works Sunday morning, she earns $46.46 per hour. For a part-time student job, her effective hourly rate across a typical week, $25 to $30, depending on shift timing. For 20 hours weekly, she earns approximately $2,000 to $2,400 monthly, enough to cover rent, groceries, and expenses without parental support or extensive student debt. The Fair Work Commission's 2024 annual wage review set this minimum wage at $23.23 per hour, making it the highest statutory minimum wage in the world when adjusted for purchasing power parity. But Australia goes further with the award system, industry-specific wage structures that set minimums even higher for various sectors, considering skill requirements and working conditions. According to OECD 2024 data, approximately 2.3 million Australian workers are paid at or near award rates. The system ensures even entry-level work provides dignified living standards. Let's address the obvious critique. Doesn't this create unemployment? Economic theory suggests high minimum wages should reduce hiring. Yet Australia's unemployment rate sits at 3.9% as of late 2024, relatively low by international standards. The economy has adapted through higher productivity expectations, increased automation in some sectors, and consumer acceptance of higher service costs. The philosophical foundation, work, even entry-level part-time work, should provide dignified living. The minimum wage shouldn't be a poverty wage. Critics argue this creates business costs, barriers to employment for low-skilled workers, and contributes to inflation. Supporters point to lower working poverty rates and reduced reliance on government assistance to supplement inadequate wages. So we've covered 10 significant differences. Let's pull this together. These 10 policies, universal healthcare, paid parental leave, income-contingent education loans, unemployment support, mandatory retirement contributions, disability pensions, childcare subsidies, pharmaceutical benefits, protected leave entitlements, and high minimum wages, share common structural threads. They're built on collective risk sharing. They involve mandatory contributions or taxes. They grant government significant negotiating power. And they cost money. Australia's tax-to-GDP ratio is 29.5% compared to America's 26.6%, according to OECD 2023 data. But they also create measurably different outcomes. Australia has lower rates of medical bankruptcy, almost non-existent compared to American rates. Higher intergenerational economic mobility. Different integration between work and life. Lower child poverty rates. Higher life expectancy. Here's what makes these policies scary to some Americans. They represent loss of individual choice in favor of collective solutions. They require higher taxation. They grant government substantial power over major life systems. They reduce the direct connection between individual earning and individual benefit. And here's what makes them obvious to many Australians. They create social stability. They enable shared prosperity. They reduce constant anxiety about medical bills, job loss, and basic survival. They reflect the belief that societies function better when baseline security is universal. Neither system is purely superior. Both involve trade-offs between individual autonomy and collective security, between lower taxes and broader services, between market efficiency and social protection. We've explored healthcare without bankruptcy, education debt that adjusts to income, mandatory retirement savings, paid parental leave, subsidized childcare, affordable medications, protected sick leave, and the world's highest minimum wage. These aren't just policy differences, they're fundamentally different answers to the question, what does a society owe its members? And if you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe for more deep dives comparing global policy approaches. We cut through the ideology to show you how different societies actually work. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.